The screaming hit Thomas Brennan before the smell did. He had been riding through Red Mesa Trading Post with nothing on his mind but the weight of empty years and a pocket full of cattle money. $15. Everything he owned after selling his last 3 head of Longhorn to a trader who looked at him with something close to pity. 52 years old. Bad heart. Dead wife. A son who would not speak to him. And now $15 to show for a lifetime of fighting other men's wars. Tom had planned to ride straight through this godforsaken place without stopping. Find a quiet corner of the desert to figure out what a man does when he has nothing left to live for. Maybe sell the ranch. Maybe just let it fall apart like everything else had fallen apart since Sarah died. But then he heard the screaming, and Tom Brennan stopped. The slave market of Red Mesa sat at the center of town like a wound that refused to heal. A wooden platform rose above the dust where traders displayed their merchandise to crowds of men with too much money and too little conscience. Tom had seen markets like this before. He had learned to look away. Today he could not look away. 6 girls hung upside down from wooden posts in the sweltering afternoon heat. Their bodies were bruised and broken, blood dripping from their backs where whips had torn through flesh. Their limbs trembled with exhaustion and terror as flies gathered around open wounds. Apache girls, the youngest could not have been more than 12 years old. The slave traders stood nearby laughing and drinking whiskey while their merchandise dangled like slaughtered cattle. One of them poured water over his own head to cool off while the girls baked in the sun with cracked lips and desperate eyes. Tom felt the familiar sickness rise in his stomach. He had spent 20 years trying to forget sights like this. 20 years of nightmares about the Indian Wars and the things he had seen men do to each other. He had promised Sarah he would never go back to that darkness. But Sarah was dead, and these girls were dying. Tom was about to turn away when he saw it, a mark on the shoulder of the oldest girl. A tattoo burned into her sun-darkened skin in the shape of a crescent moon with twisted wings spreading outward like the embrace of night itself. The moonwing. Tom's blood turned to ice. He knew that symbol. He had carried a piece of leather with that exact mark in his pocket for 24 years. He had looked at it on cold nights when the memories threatened to drown him. He had held it when Sarah died and whispered prayers to a god he was not sure existed. The moonwing was the sacred mark of the Chiricahua Apache, the people who measured worth not by wealth or power, but by the choices a man made when no one was watching. The people whose chief had saved Thomas Brennan's life when he was a young fool dying alone in the desert. The memory crashed over him like a flash flood. Arizona Territory, 1860. Tom was 28 years old and full of the kind of confidence that gets young men killed. He had been a cavalry soldier fighting in a conflict he did not understand against enemies who were defending their own land from invaders. His unit had engaged a raiding party of Comanche warriors near the Superstition Mountains. The battle went badly. Tom took an arrow through the shoulder and fell from his horse. When he woke up, his unit was gone and he was bleeding out in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but desert stretching to every horizon. He crawled for 3 days. By the 4th day, he had stopped crawling. His tongue was swollen. His wound was infected. He lay on his back staring at the burning sky and waiting for death to finish what the Comanche had started. That was when Chief Joseph Blackfeather found him. Joseph was 35 years old with silver already streaking his black hair and eyes that seemed to see straight through flesh and bone into the heart of a man. He led a small hunting party of Chiricahua warriors who had every reason to leave Tom where he lay or to finish him quickly and take his weapons. Instead, Joseph knelt beside him and held a water skin to his lips. Tom would never forget the first words Joseph spoke to him. The chief's English was careful and deliberate, like he was weighing each syllable before releasing it. "You wear the uniform of my enemy. Your people have taken our land and killed our families. I should leave you for the vultures." Tom had no strength to respond. He could only stare up at this man who held his life in calloused hands. "But I see something in your eyes, young soldier. Not hatred, something else. Perhaps regret. Perhaps the beginning of wisdom." Joseph lifted Tom onto a horse and rode for 2 days to a hidden cave in the mountains. There the chief himself tended to Tom's wounds. Removed the arrowhead, packed the wound with herbs, and changed the bandages. Fed him broth and forced him to drink when the fever took hold. For 3 weeks, Joseph kept Tom alive when every sensible calculation said he should have let him die. On the last night before Tom was strong enough to travel, Joseph sat with him at the mouth of the cave watching the stars emerge one by one from the darkening sky. "Why did you save me?" Tom asked. "After everything my people have done to yours?" Joseph was silent for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but it carried the weight of generations. "Because Thomas Brennan, you are at a crossroads. The man you were is dying. The man you could become is waiting to be born. I chose to help that birth along." Joseph reached into his pouch and withdrew a small piece of leather. On it was burned the image of a crescent moon with spreading wings. "This is the moon wing, the sacred mark of my people. It represents the light that guides us through darkness and the wings that lift us above our worst selves." He pressed the leather into Tom's palm. "Carry this with you, and remember these words. If you ever see this mark on any of my people, know that they are family to the man who gave you a second life. The Chiricahua measure worth not by uniform, but by the choices made when no one is watching." Tom had carried that leather for 24 years, through marriage and fatherhood, through Sarah's illness and death, through the slow collapse of everything that once gave his life meaning. He carried it still. Now he stood in the brutal sun of Red Mesa Trading Post, staring at that same mark burned into the shoulder of a girl who hung upside down, bleeding from wounds inflicted by men who saw her as nothing more than property. Joseph Blackfeather's daughter. It had to be. Tom moved before his mind could catch up to his body. His boots kicked up dust as he pushed through the crowd of gawkers and potential buyers. Men turned to look at this weathered stranger with the hard eyes and the way of walking that said he had seen violence and was not afraid of it. He reached the platform where a fat slave trader in a stained vest was shouting prices to the crowd. "6 of them already broken in, prime merchandise. Who wants to start the bidding at $50? Tom climbed the platform steps. The trader turned to face him with an expression caught between annoyance and calculation. "What do you want, old-timer?" Tom did not answer right away. He walked to where the oldest girl hung upside down and looked into her eyes. Even through pain and exhaustion and terror, he could see it. The same calm strength that Joseph had carried. The same refusal to break even when the world was determined to destroy her. "I want to buy them," Tom said. "All 6. The trader laughed. It was a wet, unpleasant sound like a hog rooting through garbage. "You and what fortune? These squaws are worth $200 minimum. You look like you could not buy a decent meal." Tom reached into his pocket and pulled out his money. $15 in worn bills. Everything he had. The trader laughed harder. The crowd joined in. Someone shouted something crude about foolish old men and savage women. Tom did not look away from the girl's eyes. She was watching him with an expression he could not quite read. Hope, maybe. Or the memory of hope from before such things were beaten out of her. He thought about Sarah, about the pocket watch she had given him on their wedding day. Gold and heavy and engraved with words that still made his heart ache. "To Thomas, my compass in the storm. All my love. Sarah, 1862. He had carried that watch for 22 years. It was the only piece of Sarah he had left. The only physical proof that their love had been real and that he had once been the kind of man who deserved such love. Tom reached into his vest and pulled out the watch. The laughter died. Even the trader could see this was no ordinary timepiece. The gold gleamed in the afternoon sun like a small piece of captured daylight. The trader's eyes grew hungry the way a coyote's eyes grow hungry when it spots an injured rabbit. "That watch," the trader said slowly, "plus the $15. Tom's hand trembled, not from fear, from the weight of what he was about to sacrifice. Sarah's voice whispered through his memory, "Do not let regret bury you. Live for those who still need you." He placed the watch and the money on the platform floor. "Deal." The trader snatched up both with greedy hands and waved at his men. "Cut them down. The old fool bought himself some dying savages." Tom caught the first girl as she fell, the one with the moon-wing tattoo. She was lighter than he expected, as if suffering had burned away everything but bone and will. Her blood soaked through his shirt as he lowered her gently to the platform. "Easy now. I have you." Her eyes found his face, dark eyes that held pain beyond words, but also something else. Recognition, maybe, or the first fragile stirring of trust. "Who are you?" she whispered through cracked lips. Someone who owes your father everything, Tom said. My name is Thomas Brennan. Her eyes widened. For a moment, she seemed to forget her wounds and her terror and the five sisters still being cut down around her. You are the soldier, the one from the cave. My father told me about you. He spoke of me every year on the anniversary of saving you. He called you the man who could have been different. He hoped you became different. Tom felt something shift in his chest, something that had been frozen solid since Sarah's death, beginning to crack and move again. I am trying to be, he said. I am trying. Tom carried her down from the platform while his mind raced through possibilities and dangers. The crowd watched with expressions ranging from confusion to contempt. No one interfered. In the brutal economy of the frontier, a legal purchase was a legal purchase, no matter how strange the buyer or his motives. The other five girls followed on shaking legs. The youngest could barely walk. Tom saw her stumble and without thinking swept her up into his arms alongside her sister. Where are we going? The youngest asked. Her voice was small and frightened, but there was something else there too. A refusal to be completely broken that reminded Tom painfully of his son James at that age. Somewhere safe, Tom said, I promise. He led them through the back alleys of Red Mesa to an abandoned warehouse behind the market. The building was rotting and forgotten, but it had walls and a roof and shadows where they could hide while he figured out what to do next. Inside the warehouse, light pierced through gaps in the tin roof and fell across their bruised, battered faces. Tom set both girls down carefully and turned to look at all six of them. 6 daughters of Joseph Blackfeather. 6 lives that now depended on a broken old man with a failing heart. What had he done? Water first, he said, keeping his voice steady even as doubt gnawed at his edges. Then we tend those wounds. He opened his saddlebag and pulled out his canteen and 2 strips of clean cloth. Not nearly enough for 6 wounded girls, but it was a start. It had to be a start. The oldest girl helped her sisters drink. Each of them sipped carefully, making the water last, making sure everyone got their share before taking more for themselves. Tom watched this small act of generosity and felt something tighten in his throat. Joseph had raised them well. When the immediate thirst was addressed, the oldest girl turned to face Tom directly. She moved stiffly, pain evident in every motion, but she held herself with a dignity that her circumstances had not managed to destroy. I am Elena Blackfeather, she said. These are my sisters. Kaya is 21, Tala is 19, Nina is 16, Lily is 14, and Rosa is 12. She pointed to each sister as she named them. Kaya coughed wetly, and Tom could see the infection already spreading through the wounds on her back. Tala sat in silence, staring at nothing with eyes that had seen too much. Nina and Lily pressed against each other, drawing what comfort they could from physical closeness. Rosa, the youngest, sat apart watching Tom with a directness that was almost unsettling. My father spoke of you often, Elena continued. He said you had a warrior's heart wrapped in a wanderer's clothes. He said saving you was one of the proudest moments of his life. Tom felt the familiar weight of unworthiness settle over him. Your father was a far better man than me. Perhaps, but you are the man who came today. That is what matters now. Tom knelt to examine Kaya's wounds more closely. The infection was bad. She needed proper medicine and rest and time to heal, none of which they were likely to get. What happened? He asked. How did you end up in that market? Elena's face hardened. The story came out in pieces, each fragment sharp enough to cut. 4 weeks ago, a band of raiders led by a man named Silas Crane had attacked their village. But this was not a simple raid. Crane had arrived with papers, legal documents claiming that Chiricahua land actually belonged to him. He said he had purchased it from a tribal chief years earlier. The documents were forged. Elena knew this because the chief Crane claimed to have dealt with had been dead for decades before the supposed sale took place. But forged documents backed by armed men are difficult to argue against. Joseph had refused to accept the false claim. He had gathered evidence of the forgery and ridden to Fort Defiance to file a formal complaint with the territorial authorities. He believed in the law. He believed that justice could be found through proper channels if only the truth could be heard. He was wrong. Crane had been waiting for him on the road back. An ambush, 20 men against 1. My father fought, Elena said, and her voice cracked for the first time. He fought until he could not fight anymore. They shot him in the back as he tried to reach his horse. Tom closed his eyes. He could see it. Joseph Blackfeather dying alone on a dusty road, betrayed by the laws he had trusted. His final thoughts probably of his daughters and whether they would survive. After he was dead, Crane's men came to the village. They took us, all 9 of us. Tom's head snapped up. 9? There are only 6 of you here. Oh, 3 more of my sisters were separated from us 2 weeks ago. Mia is 18, Sarah is 15, Luna is 13. Crane is keeping them at a place called Devil's Cut, a canyon 3 days' ride from here. Tom knew the place by reputation, a narrow gorge in the Badlands where outlaws gathered to divide their spoils and conduct business away from the eyes of the law. Not the kind of place a man rode into alone and expected to ride out again. Why separate you? Elena's jaw tightened. Because Crane is not just a slaver, he is a land speculator. He forged those documents to steal our territory because there is water there. A spring that never runs dry, even in the worst droughts. Worth a fortune to the railroad companies pushing west. Tom began to understand. He killed Joseph to eliminate the one person who could prove the forgery. Yes, and he took us to eliminate any legal heirs who might challenge his claim in court. As long as Joseph's daughters exist, we have standing to contest ownership of our land. But if we are sold to buyers in Mexico or California or worse, you disappear. No heirs, no challenge, clean title. Elena nodded. He is not just killing us, Mr. Brennan. He is erasing our existence from legal record. Tom sat back on his heels and let the full weight of the situation settle over him. This was not just a rescue mission. This was war against a man who had twisted the law itself into a weapon. A man with money and men and the patience to play a long game. And here sat Thomas Brennan with $15 worth of cattle money spent on a gold watch and a handful of beaten girls and a heart that might give out at any moment. Joseph, what have you gotten me into? Rosa spoke up suddenly. Her voice was small but clear in the dusty silence of the warehouse. Are you going to help us? Tom looked at the 12-year-old girl, saw the desperate hope in her eyes, saw the shadow of James at that age looking up at him with the same trust that Tom had betrayed 1,000 times with his absences and his silences and his inability to be the father his son needed. I gave up everything I own for you 6, Tom said slowly. Would not make sense to stop halfway. He stood up, ignoring the twinge in his chest where his heart was doing its irregular dance. There would be time for pain later, or there would not. Either way, the next few hours would determine whether any of them had a future at all. Devil's Cut is 3 days' ride? Yes, but Tom, Elena hesitated. Crane has 15 men. You are one old man with a bad heart and not enough bullets, I know. How can you possibly? I cannot fight 15 men in open combat, but I do not need to. I just need to get your sisters out. He pulled out his Winchester rifle and checked the action, still smooth after all these years. He had maintained it out of habit long after he thought he would never use it again. Old soldiers never completely gave up their tools. Tonight we rest. We move at sunset when the heat breaks. I know trails through the Badlands that most men have forgotten. We travel light and fast and quiet. And when we reach Devil's Cut, Tom thought of Joseph kneeling beside him in that desert 24 years ago, choosing mercy over practicality, choosing hope over calculation. Then I do what your father did for me. I find a way. They left the warehouse as the sun bled red and orange across the western sky. Tom led his horse by the reins with Rosa on its back because she was too weak to walk any distance. The other 5 girls followed in a loose line, moving through the shadows of Red Mesa's back streets like ghosts afraid of being seen. No one stopped them. No one even looked twice at the strange old man and his parade of battered Apache girls. In a town like Red Mesa, people had learned not to see things that might complicate their lives. Once they cleared the town limits, Tom turned east toward the mountains. The trail he chose was an old one, barely visible beneath years of wind and weather. He had ridden it decades ago when he was young, and the territory was even wilder than it was now. Back then it had been a smuggler's path. Now it was simply forgotten. They walked through the cooling evening and into the moonlit night. Tom kept the pace slow for the sake of the wounded girls, but his eyes never stopped scanning the darkness. Something felt wrong. A prickling at the back of his neck that he had learned to trust in 20 years of frontier survival. They were being followed. He spotted the first sign near midnight, fresh hoofprints crossing their trail, heading in the same direction they were traveling. Too fresh to be coincidence. Too careful to be casual travelers. Tom said nothing to the girls. No point in adding fear to their already heavy burdens. But he adjusted their route slightly, leading them into rougher terrain where horses would leave clearer tracks. If someone was following, he wanted to know exactly how many and how close. By dawn, he had his answer. 3 riders, moving parallel to their course but making no move to intercept. Scouts, most likely. Crane's men keeping eyes on the merchandise that had escaped. Tom called a halt in a narrow gully where rock walls would hide them from distant observation. The girls collapsed gratefully in the shade while Tom climbed a low rise to study their back trail. "What do you see?" Elena had followed him, moving quietly despite her injuries. 3 men, about a mile behind. They are not trying to catch us yet, just watching. Waiting for reinforcements? Probably, or waiting for us to lead them somewhere useful. Tom lowered himself from the rise. We need to deal with them before we get anywhere near Devil's Cut. How? Tom looked at Elena for a long moment, saw her father in the set of her jaw and the steady way she met his gaze. "Your father ever teach you to shoot?" "He taught me many things." "Good, because I cannot do this alone." They made camp in the gully and let the girls rest while Tom showed Elena how to handle his Colt Navy revolver. She learned quickly, her hands steady even when the weight of the weapon made her wounded arms tremble. 6 shots, Tom said. Make each one count. No wild firing. Pick your target and squeeze slow. And if I miss, then you move. Stay behind cover. Make them come to you. A patient defender beats a reckless attacker 9 times out of 10. Kaya's coughing got worse as the day wore on. Tom checked her wounds and felt his stomach clench. The infection was spreading. She was burning with fever, and the herbs he had were doing nothing to stop it. She needs a doctor, he told Elena quietly. Real medicine. We do not have that kind of time. Then we move faster. If we push too hard, she will not survive the journey. Elena's eyes glistened, but she did not let the tears fall. What would you have me choose? Leave her behind? I am not asking you to choose. I am telling you the truth so you can make an informed decision. It was the way he had always approached problems. Lay out the facts, consider the options, accept the consequences. Sarah used to say it made him seem cold, but Sarah had also understood that beneath the calculation was a heart that felt everything too deeply. We keep moving, Elena finally just said. All of us together. If Kaya dies, at least she dies with her sisters, not alone in some canyon waiting for vultures. Tom nodded. It was what he would have chosen too. They moved out at sunset, pushing harder than before, but still careful to leave clear tracks for the scouts following them. Tom wanted those 3 men to feel confident, wanted them to believe they were tracking a wounded old man and 6 helpless girls with no idea they were being watched. Just before midnight, Tom called another halt in a cluster of boulders that formed a natural ambush point. The trail ahead narrowed between 2 rock walls. Anyone following would have to pass through single file. Here, he said to Elena, take your sisters into those rocks and stay hidden. No matter what you hear, do not come out until I call for you. What are you going to do? Set a trap. Tom spent the next hour preparing. He loosened rocks above the trail that could be pushed down with minimal effort. He positioned himself on a ledge where he could see the approach without being seen. He checked his rifle again and counted his ammunition. 12 rounds. Not enough for a prolonged fight, but hopefully enough for a short one. He waited. The 3 riders appeared just before dawn, their silhouettes emerging from the gray light like shadows given form. They moved carefully, but not carefully enough. Tom could see the laziness in their posture, the assumption that their quarry was unaware and helpless. He let the first rider pass beneath him, then the second. When the 3rd rider was directly below, Tom pushed the loosened rocks. The horse screamed as stones crashed down around it. The rider flew from his saddle and hit the ground hard. His companions wheeled their horses, reaching for weapons, shouting confused warnings to each other. Tom fired twice. The first shot took the second rider through the chest. He toppled backward off his horse and did not move again. The first rider spurred toward cover, but Tom's second shot caught him in the leg. He screamed and fell, his horse bolting away into the desert. The third rider was struggling to his feet when Tom slid down from his ledge. The man was young, maybe 25, with wild eyes and a hand reaching for the pistol at his hip. "Don't," Tom said. The young man froze. Up close, Tom could see the fear beneath the bravado. This was not a hardened killer. This was a hired hand who had signed up for easy money and found himself staring at death. "Who sent you?" "Crane. Mr. Crane sent us to watch and report back." "Report what?" "Where you were taking them. He figured you would head for Fort Defiance. He has men there waiting." Tom felt the information settle into place. Crane was not just defending his territory, he was playing chess, anticipating moves and positioning pieces. "What else?" The young man hesitated. Tom cocked his rifle. "He knows about you," the young man blurted. "Knows you are the soldier old Joseph saved. He said you would come. Said men like you cannot help themselves when they see that mark. He was counting on it." Tom went cold. This was not chance. Crane had known that if he marked Joseph's daughters with the moonwing and displayed them publicly, someone who recognized the symbol might appear. Someone who felt obligated to intervene. It was a trap, and Tom had walked right into it. "Where are the other 3 girls being held?" "Devil's Cut, like they told you. But Crane is there too now, with 12 men, and he is not planning to sell those girls tomorrow." "What is he planning?" The young man's face twisted with something that might have been shame. "He is planning to wait. Wait for you to come, then kill you all and bury the bodies where no one will ever find them. No witnesses, no loose ends. Just clean title to land worth a fortune." Tom stared at the young man for a long moment. The wounded rider was groaning somewhere behind them, but Tom ignored him. Everything had changed. This was not a rescue mission anymore. It was an execution he had to prevent. "How long until Crane expects to hear from you?" "Sunset today. If we do not report, he will know something went wrong." Tom checked the position of the sun. Maybe 10 hours. 10 hours to cover 2 days' worth of ground if they pushed hard. 10 hours to come up with a plan to defeat a dozen armed men who were waiting for him. Impossible. But then again, so was surviving an arrow wound alone in the desert. So was an Apache chief choosing to save an enemy soldier. So was finding meaning in life after everything that gave it meaning had been stripped away. Tom had survived impossible before. "Get up," he told the young man. "You are coming with us." "What? Why?" "Because you are going to tell me everything you know about Crane's operation. Every man, every gun, every weakness. And when we reach Devil's Cut, you are going to help me get those girls out." "Crane will kill me." "Probably, but if you do not help me, I will definitely kill you. Right here, right now. So you have a choice. Certain death or probable death. Pick one." The young man stared at Tom's face and saw something there that convinced him argument was useless. "I will help," he said quietly. Tom nodded and turned away. Behind him, Elena emerged from the rocks with her sisters. Her eyes took in the scene, the bodies, the wounded rider, the captured scout, and she asked no questions. She simply began helping her sisters prepare to move. That was when Tom felt it, the squeeze in his chest that he had been dreading. Not pain exactly, but a wrongness, a flutter where there should be a steady beat. His vision grayed at the edges and he stumbled. Elena was at his side instantly. "Tom, I'm fine." "You are not fine. You are gray as ash." She pressed something into his hand. A small bottle. He recognized it. Digitalis, the medicine that kept his ruined heart beating something close to regularly. "How did you—" "I found it in your saddlebag when I was looking for bandages. I know what it is. My father had a friend who needed the same medicine." She met his eyes with that unflinching black feather gaze. "You knew you might not survive this." No, Tom did not deny it. There seemed no point. "I knew, but debts do not care about hearts. We will carry you back to Red Mesa. Get you to a doctor." "No." Tom swallowed the digitalis and waited for his heart to settle into something approaching normal rhythm. Three girls still waiting at Devil's Cut. We finish this. Elena looked at him for a long moment. Tom could see her calculating options and outcomes just as he did. She was her father's daughter, all right. Then we finish it together, she finally said. But you lean on me when you need to. No more pretending you are fine when you are not. Tom almost smiled. Almost. Deal. They moved out with the captured scout in tow and the weight of impossible odds pressing down on all of them. Behind them, the desert swallowed their tracks. Ahead, the mountains rose like the walls of a prison they were determined to enter. Somewhere in those mountains, Crane was waiting with guns and men and a plan that accounted for everything except the stubbornness of an old man who had finally found something worth dying for. On the morning of the second day, they encountered two more travelers on the trail. An older Apache woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that held decades of sorrow. She introduced herself as Diving Hawk. She had been searching for her son, she said. A boy named Daniel taken by Crane's raiders 10 years ago when he was just 12 years old. She had tracked rumors and whispers across the territory until they led her here. With her rode a young man who kept his distance and said little. His name was Daniel Whitehawk. He had the look of someone caught between two worlds, uncertain which one he belonged to anymore. Diving Hawk watched him with a mixture of hope and heartbreak that Tom recognized. The look of a parent who had lost a child and was not sure if they had truly found them again. When Diving Hawk saw Elena's moonwing tattoo, she had wept. She knew that symbol, knew what it meant. She asked to join them, and Tom had agreed. Two more fighters were two more chances of survival, and something told him that Diving Hawk's story and Crane's crimes were connected in ways he did not yet understand. Tom Brennan had made a promise to a 12-year-old girl. He intended to keep it. They reached the outskirts of Devil's Cut as the sun bled its last light across the Badlands. The canyon rose before them like a wound torn into the earth itself, red rock walls climbing toward a sky turning purple with approaching night. Tom lay flat against warm stone and studied the terrain through eyes that had seen 100 battlefields. His chest ached with every breath, but he pushed the pain aside. Pain was a luxury he could not afford. Below them, the canyon floor spread out in a rough circle, perhaps 200 yards across. 3 campfires flickered against the gathering darkness, their light dancing across the weathered faces of men who had chosen violence as a profession. Tom counted 12 figures moving between 4 hide tents arranged in a loose semicircle. Horses stamped and snorted in a crude rope corral near the eastern wall. Supplies were stacked beneath a canvas tarp, and there at the far end of the camp stood a tent set apart from the others with 2 wooden stakes driven into the ground at its entrance, the mark of valuable cargo. Elena crawled up beside him. Her breath was controlled and quiet, her movements careful despite the wounds that had still troubled her. 3 days of hard travel had not broken her. If anything, she seemed to have grown stronger, her grief and rage compressed into something cold and useful. "My sisters are in that tent," she whispered. "I know." "How do we reach them?" Tom studied the layout with the patience of a man who understood that rushing into danger was the quickest path to the grave. The canyon had one main entrance to the north where they now watched. But his experienced eyes picked out 2 other possibilities. A narrow crack in the eastern wall barely wide enough for a single person to squeeze through, and a shadow on the southern face that might indicate a cave or tunnel. "We need more information," he said. "Guard rotations, patrol patterns, where Crane sleeps. The scout you captured, Marcus, he knows these things." Tom nodded slowly. The young man they had taken prisoner had proven surprisingly cooperative over the past 3 days. Fear had loosened his tongue and something else too, something that looked almost like relief at being forced onto a different path. They retreated from the overlook and made their way back to where the others waited in a sheltered hollow. The 6 black feather sisters sat together in the fading light, drawing comfort from each other's presence. Diving Hawk, the older Apache woman they had encountered on the trail, tended to Kaya's wounds with herbs gathered during their journey. And there was Daniel. Tom still was not entirely sure what to make of Daniel Whitehawk. The young man sat apart from the others, his eyes carrying the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen too much violence too young. He was perhaps 22 years old, but he moved like someone much older, his body carrying memories that his mind had not yet learned to process. When they had first encountered him on the trail, Daniel had been wary as a wounded animal. He had watched them from a distance for hours before finally approaching. It was only when Diving Hawk had spoken to him in Shirakawa, only when she had sung a few bars of an old lullaby, that something in his eyes had shifted. Recognition fighting through years of buried memory. Diving Hawk's son, taken by Crane's men 10 years earlier when he was just a boy of 12, raised among raiders and taught to see his own people as enemies. The reunion had been painful to witness. Diving Hawk reaching for her lost child with trembling hands. Daniel flinching away like her touch might burn him. Years of separation and manipulation standing between them like a wall neither knew how to breach. But Daniel had chosen to come with them. That had to mean something. Tom approached Marcus, the captured scout, who sat with his hands bound and his back against a boulder. The young man looked up with wary eyes. "Tell me about the camp," Tom said. "Everything." Marcus swallowed hard. 12 men, including Crane. They rotate guards in 4-hour shifts. 2 on the prisoner tent at all times. 2 more patrolling the perimeter. The rest sleep or drink or play cards. Where does Crane sleep? Main tent, largest one near the center fire. He keeps 2 men outside his door at all times, never goes anywhere alone. Weapons? Everyone carries a sidearm, most have rifles too. Crane has a shotgun he keeps loaded with buckshot. Says it is for close work. Tom filed the information away. 12 men was bad odds, but not impossible if he could even them somehow. Take out the sentries quietly. Create confusion. Get the girls out before anyone knew what was happening. "There is something else," Marcus said quietly. Tom waited. The men guarding the prisoner tent, one of them is Apache. Elena stepped forward, her eyes sharp. "Apache? Working for Crane?" "Crane has several. Boys he took young and raised as his own, broke them down and built them back up loyal to him." Marcus glanced at Daniel, who stood at the edge of the group listening. "Like him. There are maybe 4 or 5 in the camp. They are the most dangerous because they have the most to prove." Tom felt the weight of this new complication settle over him. He had been prepared to fight outlaws and criminals. Men who had chosen evil with clear eyes and open hearts. But children stolen from their families and twisted into weapons against their own people. That was something else entirely. "If we attack," Elena said slowly, "we might have to kill our own." "Yes." Diving Hawk rose from where she had been tending Kaya. Her face was carved from stone, but her eyes held depths of pain that Tom recognized. The pain of a mother who had lost her child to darkness. "I know some of those boys," she said. "Knew their mothers, sang at their naming ceremonies. To kill them would be to kill what remains of families already destroyed. But if they stand between us and the girls, then we find another way." Tom looked at the faces around him. 6 wounded girls depending on him to save their sisters. A mother desperate to reclaim her broken son. A young man struggling to remember who he was before violence became his only language. And his own failing heart counting down the hours until it finally gave out. He had promised Rosa he would bring her sisters back. He had not promised it would be easy. "There is another way into the canyon," Tom said. "A cave on the southern face. If it connects through the rock, we might be able to reach the prisoner tent without being seen." Diving Hawk nodded slowly. "I know these mountains. Spent my youth hunting these canyons before the raids began. There is a cave system that runs beneath Devil's Cut. My grandmother used it to hide from soldiers during the wars. Can you find the entrance?" "In my sleep." "Then we have a chance, Biyava." They made camp in the hollow and waited for full darkness. Tom sat apart from the others, checking his weapons and trying to ignore the irregular rhythm of his heart. 12 rounds for his rifle, 6 for his revolver. Not enough for a prolonged fight, but perhaps enough for a quick one. Elena approached and sat beside him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The stars were emerging overhead, cold and distant and indifferent to the struggles of those who watched them. "You could leave us here," she said finally. "Wake your horse and ride for Fort Defiance. Get help. Come back with soldiers. That would take a week. Your sisters do not have a week. But you might live." Tom turned to look at her. In the starlight, she looked so much like Joseph that his chest ached with more than just his failing heart. "Your father saved me 24 years ago," he said. "He did not calculate the odds or weigh his options. He saw a man dying and he chose to help. That is who he was. And that is who you want to be? That is who I should have been all along, before the wars, before I let duty become an excuse for cruelty, before I lost my way and my family and everything that mattered. Tom looked down at his weathered hands. I am 52 years old, Elena. My heart is giving out. My son will not speak to me. My wife is dead, but I can do this one thing right before the end. I can honor the debt I owe to the man who gave me a second chance. Elena was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. My father always said you had too much regret for one lifetime. He was right. She placed her hand over his. But regret is just unlived change. Tonight we change. Tom felt something ease in his chest, not the physical pain, but something deeper, something he had been carrying since Sarah died, and James walked away, and he found himself alone with nothing but memories of all the ways he had failed. Maybe this was redemption. Maybe this was just stubbornness. Either way, he was going to see it through. Midnight came cold and clear. The group assembled at the edge of the hollow, and Diving Hawk led them south through terrain that seemed impassable until she showed them the hidden paths between the rocks. She moved with the certainty of someone returning to a beloved home, her feet finding purchase where Tom saw only shadows and stone. They reached the cave entrance an hour before dawn. It gaped in the mountainside like a mouth frozen in a silent scream, darkness spilling out like breath from some enormous sleeping creature. The passage narrows after the first chamber, Diving Hawk said. We go single file. No torches until we are deep enough that light will not be seen from outside. Tom nodded and turned to address the group. 6 Blackfeather sisters, Diving Hawk, Daniel. Earlier that evening, Tom had pulled Marcus aside and given him a choice. Take a horse and ride hard for Fort Defiance. Find Judge Morrison and tell him everything. Tell him about Crane and the forged documents and the murders. Tell him that Thomas Brennan needed help at Devil's Cut. Marcus had looked at Tom with something like gratitude in his eyes. A chance to escape. A chance to become something other than what Crane had made him. Why trust me, Marcus had asked. I could just disappear. You could, Tom had agreed, but I saw the way you looked when you told me what Crane was planning. You did not want to be part of it. This is your chance to prove that. Marcus had ridden out an hour ago. Whether he would actually deliver the message or simply vanish into the territory Tom could not know. But it was one more card played in a game where they had precious few. Now Tom addressed those who remained. Elena, Kaya, and Tala come with me and Diving Hawk. The rest of you wait here with Daniel. If we are not back by dawn, we come in after you, Rosa said firmly. Tom looked at the 12-year-old girl, saw the set of her jaw and the fire in her eyes, Joseph's granddaughter through and through. If we are not back by dawn, you take your sisters and ride for Fort Defiance. Find Judge Morrison. Tell him everything. He is an honest man. He will help you. Rosa opened her mouth to argue, but Elena cut her off with a look. The older sister knelt and embraced the younger one tightly. We will be back, Elena said. I promise. Tom hoped it was a promise she could keep. They entered the cave. The darkness was absolute, total. A physical thing that pressed against their eyes and filled their lungs with cold, damp air that tasted of stone and centuries of silence. Tom kept one hand on the cave wall and the other on the shoulder of the person ahead of him, trusting Diving Hawk to lead them true. The passage twisted and turned and sometimes narrowed so tight that they had to turn sideways and squeeze through gaps that scraped their shoulders and caught at their clothes. Tom's chest burned with the effort of controlled breathing. Every beat of his heart felt like a hammer blow against his ribs. Not yet, he told his body. Not yet. After what felt like hours, but was probably less than one, Diving Hawk called a halt. We are beneath the canyon floor now, she whispered. The prisoner tent is directly above us, maybe 50 feet. Tom struck a match and in its brief flare saw a chamber perhaps 20 feet across. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, creating an irregular rhythm, like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. A narrow passage continued ahead, sloping upward toward a gray hint of light. That leads to a crack in the canyon wall, Diving Hawk said, close to the tent but hidden by boulders. We can slip out unseen if we time it right. Guard rotation? Should be changing soon. When the new guards arrive, the old ones will be tired and distracted. That is our window. They crept forward through the final passage. The gray light grew stronger, and with it came sounds. Voices, the crackle of fire, a horse whinnying, the ordinary noises of a camp preparing for another day. Tom reached the crack in the canyon wall and pressed his eye to the gap. He could see the prisoner tent perhaps 30 yards away. Two guards stood at its entrance, both young, both Apache. One of them was barely more than a boy, maybe 15 or 16, with eyes that darted nervously at every sound. "I know him," Diving Hawk breathed beside Tom. "The younger one. His name is Swift Bird. His mother was my cousin. She died in the raid that took Daniel." Tom watched the young guard shift his weight from foot to foot. There was no hardness in his face, no cruelty, just fear and confusion and the desperate desire to please the only authority figure he had left. "Can you reach him?" "I do not know. 10 years is a long time. He was 6 when they took him. But if I could, it might make the difference between bloodshed and survival." Tom made his decision. It was a risk. Everything was a risk, but he had seen too much death in his life to add more if there was any other way. "Try." Diving Hawk nodded and closed her eyes. When she opened them again, her face had changed. The warrior had softened into something else. A mother, an aunt, a keeper of memories. She began to sing. The sound was soft at first, barely a whisper, a melody that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. An old song, a Chiricahua lullaby that mothers had sung to their children for generations uncounted. Tom watched Swift Bird freeze. The young guard's face went through a transformation that was painful to witness. Confusion, recognition, memory flooding back through walls built to contain it. Diving Hawk sang on. The words spoke of stars and safety and arms that would always hold you close. The words spoke of home. Swift Bird began to shake. The older guard noticed something was wrong and reached for his companion's shoulder, but Swift Bird pulled away. He was staring at the crack in the canyon wall where Diving Hawk's voice emerged. Tears were streaming down his face. "Aunt," he whispered. "Aunt Diving Hawk." The older guard went for his gun. Tom moved. He burst from the crack in the wall with a speed that surprised even himself. Years of training took over, his body remembering what his mind had tried to forget. He caught the older guard before the man could shout and drove an elbow into his throat. A knife followed, and it was over. Swift Bird watched with wide eyes as Tom lowered the body silently to the ground. "I am sorry," Tom said. "There was no other way." But Swift Bird was not looking at the dead guard. He was looking past Tom to where Diving Hawk had emerged from the crack. The older woman opened her arms, and Swift Bird walked into them like a child coming home from a nightmare. They held each other as Elena and the others slipped past them into the prisoner tent. Inside, Tom found exactly what he had hoped for and feared. 3 young women bound to wooden stakes, their faces bruised but their eyes alive. Mia at 18 was the oldest. Sarah at 15 and Luna at 13 completed the group, and there was a 4th prisoner. An older woman, perhaps 48 or 50, with silver streaks in her black hair and a face that bore the marks of recent violence. She looked up as Elena entered, and her eyes went wide. "Elena, oh spirits, Elena." "Aunt Naomi." Elena dropped to her knees beside the woman. "We thought you were dead." "Crane kept me alive, said I might be useful for negotiations if the legal challenges went badly." The woman's voice was hoarse but strong. "He underestimated how stubborn your father's children would be." Tom cut their bonds quickly while keeping one ear tuned to the sounds of the camp. So far, no alarm had been raised, but that could change at any moment. "Can you walk?" he asked the freed prisoners. "We can run if we have to," Mia said. Her voice carried the same steel as Elena's. These were Joseph Blackfeather's daughters. They did not break easily. They slipped out of the tent into the gray pre-dawn light. Swiftbird led the way now, his knowledge of the camp layout proving invaluable as they threaded between shadows and avoided the sightlines of sleeping guards. They were 50 feet from the cave entrance when everything went wrong. A shout rang out from across the camp, then another, then the sharp crack of a gunshot that echoed off the canyon walls like thunder. "They have found the body," Tom said. "Run." They ran, but the camp was awake now, and men were pouring out of tents with guns in their hands and murder in their eyes. Bullets whined off stone as Tom turned and fired. One man dropped. Another. But there were too many, and they were closing fast. "The cave!" Diving Hawk shouted. "Get to the cave!" Elena grabbed Luna and half-carried her toward the crack in the canyon wall. Mia and Sarah followed with Naomi between them. Kaya and Tala brought up the rear, their wounds forgotten in the desperate scramble for survival. Tom stood his ground and fired until his rifle clicked empty. Then he drew his revolver and fired again. Two more men fell, but the rest kept coming, their bullets chipping stone inches from his head. "Tom!" Elena screamed. "Come on!" He turned to run, but something hit him hard in the shoulder. The impact spun him around and dropped him to one knee. Blood bloomed hot and wet against his shirt. Not now, not yet. He forced himself upright and stumbled toward the cave. Strong hands grabbed him and pulled him through the crack, just as a volley of shots shattered the stone where he had been standing. Inside the passage was chaos. Bodies pressing together in darkness. Frightened breathing. The smell of blood and fear. "Move," Tom gasped. "They will follow." They plunged deeper into the cave system, with Diving Hawk leading the way from memory. Behind them, Tom could hear pursuit. Boots on stone. Curse and commands. The sounds of men not accustomed to darkness, struggling to navigate terrain they did not know. That was the only advantage they had. Knowledge of the caves, and the desperation of those with nothing left to lose. The passage narrowed and twisted, and finally opened into a larger chamber. Tom recognized it as the space they had passed through earlier. The crack of gray light from the surface was brighter now as dawn broke over the canyon. "Seal the passage," he ordered. Kaya and Tala worked frantically to pile loose rocks across the narrow entrance they had just come through. It would not stop determined pursuit, but it would slow them down. Tom leaned against the cave wall and tried to assess his wound. The bullet had gone through the meat of his shoulder without hitting bone. Painful and bloody, but not immediately fatal. He had survived worse. "Let me see." Elena was beside him with strips of cloth torn from her own shirt. She worked quickly, packing the wound and binding it tight while Tom gritted his teeth against the pain. "We cannot stay here," he said when she finished. "Crane will send men around to the main entrance. We will be trapped between them." "Then where do we go?" Tom thought of the canyon beyond the cave. Devil's Hollow, the locals called it. A wider space with high walls and better defensive positions. If they could reach it and hold out long enough, maybe help would come. Maybe the message he had sent to Fort Defiance with Marcus before they entered the caves would bring soldiers in time. Maybe. A lot of maybes for a man with a bullet hole in his shoulder and a heart that was beating far too fast. "Through the caves," he said. "Out the other side, we to make our stand in Devil's Hollow." The passage ahead was narrow and twisting, but Diving Hawk knew every turn. She led them through darkness so complete that Tom could not see his own hand in front of his face. They moved by touch and trust, each person holding on to the one ahead, a chain of desperate humanity threading through the bowels of the earth. The underground river appeared without warning. One moment they were walking on dry stone. The next, Tom's boots splashed into water that rose quickly from ankle to knee to waist. The cold was shocking, brutal. His breath seized in his chest and his heart stuttered dangerously. "Keep moving," Diving Hawk called back. "The water is only deep for 100 feet, then it shallows." They pushed forward through the current. Tom could feel it tugging at his legs, trying to pull him off balance. The wounded were struggling. Kaya was coughing again, great racking sounds that echoed off unseen walls. Luna was crying softly. And then Tom heard it. A roar. Distant but growing, the unmistakable sound of water coming fast. "Flash flood!" he shouted. "Move! Everyone move now!" The group surged forward, but the current was strengthening with every passing second. Upstream somewhere, rain had fallen, and the runoff was funneling through these ancient passages with devastating force. Tala stumbled and went under. Tom lunged and caught her arm, hauling her back to the surface. The effort nearly stopped his heart. Literally. He felt it skip and flutter, and for one terrible moment he thought this was the end. Keep going, almost there. The water was chest high now and rising. The roar was deafening. Tom could feel the pressure wave coming, could sense the wall of water rushing toward them through the darkness. "There!" Diving Hawk screamed. "The far bank, climb!" Tom pushed Tala toward the voice and turned to grab Luna, who was flailing in the current. The girl's eyes were white with terror, but she clung to him as he dragged them both toward higher ground. They made it to the far bank just as the flood surge arrived. The water exploded through the passage behind them with a sound like the world ending. It crashed against the walls and rebounded and filled the space where they had been standing only seconds before. If they had been caught in that surge, none of them would have survived. Tom lay on cold stone, gasping for breath. His shoulders screamed with pain. His heart pounded erratically. His whole body shook with cold and exhaustion and the after effects of terror. But they were alive. He counted heads in the darkness. Elena, Kaya, Tala, Mia, Sarah, Luna, Naomi, Diving Hawk, Swiftbird, all present, all breathing. They had lost no one. "Is everyone all right?" Elena's voice was steady despite everything. Murmurs of assent rose from the darkness. Shaking voices, but alive voices, that was all that mattered. "The passage behind us is flooded," Diving Hawk said. "Crane's men cannot follow this way. We have time." Time. Tom almost laughed. Time was the one thing he did not have. He could feel his heart laboring in his chest, struggling to maintain rhythm after the stress of the escape. The digitalis was wearing off and he had no more. But there would be time for dying later. Right now, there were still people depending on him. How far to Devil's Hollow? "Perhaps half a mile through the upper passages. We will emerge on the canyon floor." "Then let us keep moving. Crane will not give up easily. He will find another way around." They pressed on through the darkness. The passages rose steadily now, leaving the flooded chambers behind. Tom moved on willpower alone, his body beyond exhaustion, his mind focused on one simple goal: get them out, get them safe. Then you can rest. Gray light appeared ahead, then brighter light. Then suddenly they were stumbling out of the mountainside into a wide canyon bathed in early morning sun. Devil's Hollow spread before them like an amphitheater carved by giants. Red rock walls rose 60 feet on all sides, their surfaces scarred by wind and water and countless years of patient erosion. The canyon floor was perhaps 300 yards across, dotted with boulders and scrub brush, and the scattered remains of ancient rockfalls. It was beautiful. It was defensible. And if they could not hold it, they would die here. Tom surveyed the terrain with a soldier's eye. 3 entrances. The cave they had just exited on the south wall, a narrow gap in the eastern wall barely wide enough for a single person, and a wider passage to the north that led out toward the desert. "Block the southern entrance," he ordered. "Pile rocks, make it impassable. They cannot come through the flooded caves, so that leaves only 2 approaches to defend." The women moved to obey while Tom climbed a small rise to study the northern approach. In the distance, he could see dust rising. Riders, coming fast. Crane had found another way around. Tom counted the dust clouds. 8, maybe 10 horses, most of Crane's remaining force. They would arrive within the hour. He climbed down and gathered the group around him. 11 faces looked back at him. 11 lives depending on an old man with a bad heart and not enough bullets. "They are coming," he said simply. "We have maybe an hour before they reach us. Here is what we are going to do." He laid out the defense. Positions behind boulders, fields of fire that overlapped, fallback points if the first line was breached. He had 8 people capable of fighting. 6 Blackfeather sisters, plus Diving Hawk and Swiftbird, against 10 or more armed men. The odds were not good, but they were better than he had faced in the caves. "What about weapons?" Mia asked. "We have your guns and Swiftbird's rifle. That is not enough." "We improvise." Over the next hour they prepared. Rocks were gathered for throwing and for building barricades. Sharp stones were bound to sticks to make crude spears. Elena found a length of rope and fashioned a trip line across the narrowest approach. Tom watched them work and felt something shift in his chest. Not pain this time. Something else. These were not helpless victims waiting to be saved. These were warriors, Joseph's legacy, fighters who would not go quietly into the darkness that men like Crane tried to force upon them. He thought of his son James, thought of all the times he had been too busy fighting other people's wars to teach the boy what it meant to stand for something, what it meant to defend those who could not defend themselves. Maybe it was not too late for James. Maybe if Tom survived this, he could find his son and try again. Try to be the father he should have been all along. A lot of maybes. The dust clouds drew closer. Tom positioned himself behind a large boulder near the northern entrance. From here, he could see the approach clearly, and his rifle would command the narrow passage that any attacker would have to traverse. Elena crouched beside him. "You should let me take this position. You are wounded. I am also the best shot here. No offense." "None taken." She paused. "Tom, if we do not survive this, we will survive. But if we do not, I want you to know that my father was right about you. You did become different. You became the man he hoped you would be." Tom felt his throat tighten. "I'm just trying to pay my debts." "No, you are doing more than that. You are showing us what honor looks like. My sisters will remember this for the rest of their lives, however long that may be." Before Tom could respond, the first riders appeared at the canyon entrance. Silas Crane rode at their head. Tom had never seen the man before, but he recognized him instantly. There was something in the way Crane carried himself, an arrogance that came from years of taking whatever he wanted from whoever was too weak to stop him. He was perhaps 45, with a face weathered by sun and cruelty, and eyes that held no more warmth than a rattlesnake's. Crane reined his horse to a stop just outside rifle range. Smart. He knew someone in the canyon could shoot. "Thomas Brennan," Crane called out. His voice echoed off the canyon walls. "I have to admit I did not expect you to make it this far. An old man with a bad heart against my best trackers. I am almost impressed." Tom said nothing. "Here is how this is going to go. You send out the girls and I let you ride away. Simple as that. No more killing, no more running, just a business transaction between reasonable men." "You killed Joseph Blackfeather," Tom called back. "Shot him in the back on a road where he was trying to seek legal justice. There is nothing reasonable about you." Crane shrugged. "Joseph was a complication. I removed him. That is business in this territory. You know how it works. You were a soldier. You have removed complications yourself." The words hit Tom harder than he wanted to admit, because they were true. In his years of service, he had done things that haunted him still, followed orders he knew were wrong, looked away when cruelty was committed in the name of duty. But that was the man he used to be, not the man he was trying to become. "The difference between us, Crane, is that I learn from my sins. You revel in yours." Pretty words, but words will not stop bullets. "I have 10 men with me. You have what? A handful of wounded women and a bad heart? This ends one way, old man. The only question is, how much blood gets spilled before you accept it?" Tom raised his rifle and sighted on Crane's chest. At this range, with this weapon, he could end the man right now. Remove the head and the body might fall apart, but Crane's men had their own rifles raised, and they were spread out. Even if Tom killed Crane, he would be dead a second later, and then nothing would stand between these predators and their prey. "I will give you one chance," Tom said. "Ride away. Tell whoever sent you that the Blackfeather girls are under my protection. Come back and I will kill every one of you." Crane laughed. It was an ugly sound. "I appreciate the offer, old man, but I have too much invested in this to walk away now. That land is worth a fortune. Those girls are the only obstacle to claiming it. I am not leaving without them." He turned to his men and raised his hand. "Kill the old man. Take the girls alive. We leave in 1 hour." The riders charged. Tom fired. The lead rider tumbled from his saddle as Tom's bullet caught him square in the chest. The others scattered, seeking cover behind rocks and scrub as more shots rang out from the canyon. Swiftbird was firing from a position on the eastern wall. Diving Hawk had a bow she had fashioned from a bent branch and sinew, her arrows finding targets with surprising accuracy. Elena and her sisters threw rocks from behind their barricades, forcing the attackers to keep their heads down. For a few chaotic minutes, it seemed like they might hold. The narrow approach limited how many men could attack at once, and the defenders knew the terrain far better than the attackers. Then Crane sent a group around to the eastern gap. Tom saw them too late. Three men slipping through the narrow passage that he had thought too small to be a real threat. They emerged behind the defender's position and opened fire. Kaya screamed as a bullet grazed her arm. Mia dove for cover, pulling Luna down with her. The careful defensive positions fell apart as everyone scrambled to respond to the threat from behind. Tom left his position and ran toward the breach. His shoulders screamed with every step. His heart pounded erratically, but there was no one else. Oh. He reached the eastern gap just as the third attacker was coming through. The man's eyes went wide as Tom appeared before him. There was no time for fancy gun work. Tom drove his knife into the man's gut and shoved him backward into his companions. The second attacker stumbled over the falling body. Tom shot him at point-blank range. The third tried to retreat, but Elena was there now with a rock in her hand. She brought it down on his skull with a crack that echoed off the canyon walls. 3 down, 7 to go. But Tom could not stand. His legs gave out and he collapsed against the canyon wall. His heart was doing something terrifying in his chest, stopping and starting, fluttering like a bird trapped in a cage. Tom! Elnana was beside him. Tom, stay with me. He tried to speak, but no words came. The world was going gray at the edges. Sounds faded to a distant murmur. He could hear Sarah calling his name. Hold on, just a little longer. There is still work to do. With an effort that cost him everything, he pulled himself back from the edge, forced his eyes to focus, forced his heart to beat. Digitalis, he gasped. In my saddlebag. The horse. Elena's eyes went to the cave entrance where Tom's horse waited with the others. 50 feet of open ground between them and the medicine that might save his life. I will get it. No, too dangerous. Crane's men. But she was already running. Tom watched her sprint across the canyon floor, watched bullets kick up dust around her feet, watched her reach the horses and tear through his saddlebag with desperate hands, watched her find the bottle and turn to run back, watched a rider emerge from cover and aim his rifle at her exposed back. Tom raised his revolver. His hand shook so badly he could barely aim. His vision was blurring. His heart was stopping. He fired. The rider jerked and fell. Elena reached Tom and pressed the bottle into his hands. He fumbled with the cap, spilled half the pills on the ground, managed to get 2 into his mouth and swallow. Then everything went dark. When Tom opened his eyes, the sun had moved. Hours must have passed. He was lying on stone with a rolled blanket under his head and Elena's worried face hovering above him. You are alive, she breathed. Apparently. He sat up slowly. His shoulder throbbed. His chest ached, but his heart was beating steadily again. For now. What happened? Crane pulled back, lost 6 men in the first assault. The rest are camped at the canyon entrance, waiting. Waiting for what? Elena's jaw tightened. Reinforcements, probably. Or for us to run out of water. Or for you to die. She paused. He knows about your heart, Tom. Marcus must have told him before we captured him. Crane thinks all he has to do is wait for your body to give out. Tom looked around the canyon. The Blackfeather sisters had regrouped behind the barricades. Diving Hawk was tending wounds. Swiftbird kept watch on the northern approach. Everyone was still standing. But Elena was right. They could not hold out forever. Water was limited. Ammunition was nearly gone. And Tom's heart could stop for good at any moment. They needed a new plan. Tom forced himself to his feet despite Elena's protests. He walked to where he could see the northern entrance. Crane's remaining men were visible in the distance. 4 horses, 4 riders, plus Crane himself. 5 against 11, better odds than before. But Crane would not make the same mistakes twice. The next assault would be more careful, more patient, designed to wear them down rather than overwhelm them. We cannot wait for them to come to us, Tom said. We have to force the issue. How? Tom looked at the canyon around them, at the high walls and the scattered boulders and the narrow passages that made assault so costly. Then he looked at Daniel. The young man stood apart from the others as he always did, but he was watching Tom with an expression that held something new. Not fear, not suspicion, something closer to hope. Daniel, come here. The young man approached slowly, his body language still carrying the wariness of someone who had learned to expect violence from any direction. You worked for Crane for 10 years, Tom said. You know how he thinks. Yes. Then tell me, what is his weakness? Daniel was quiet for a long moment. His eyes went distant, traveling back through years of memories he would probably prefer to forget. He trusts no one, Daniel finally said, but he trusts his own judgment, his own plans. He believes he is smarter than everyone else. That is why he built an organization of broken children instead of hiring professional outlaws. He wanted followers who would not question him. And if his plans started to fall apart, he would adapt, adjust, find a new angle. Daniel paused. But if he felt his control slipping, if his men started to doubt him, he might do something reckless to reassert dominance. Tom nodded slowly. An idea was forming. Dangerous, possibly suicidal, but better than waiting to die in this canyon. What if we gave his men a reason to doubt him? Daniel's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Crane has been telling his men this is a simple business operation. Acquire land, remove obstacles, profit. But what if they learn the truth? That Crane is not just after money, that he has been systematically destroying Apache families for 10 years, that some of the men riding with him might have relatives among his victims. They would not believe it. They might if it came from you, from Swiftbird, from someone who was on the inside. Daniel went very still. Tom could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, the weighing of risks and rewards that Crane had taught him. You want me to go back, Daniel said, to talk to them, to... I want you to tell them the truth. Show them what Crane really is. Give them a choice between following a monster and walking away. Crane will kill me. Maybe, or maybe some of them will listen. Maybe enough to change the odds. Daniel looked toward the canyon entrance, toward the camp where he had spent 10 years of his life, toward the man who had stolen his childhood and twisted him into something he barely recognized. His mother diving hawk approached and placed a hand on his arm. You do not have to do this, she said. You have already come back to us. That is enough. No, Daniel's voice was quiet but firm. It is not enough. I spent 10 years helping Crane hurt our people, standing by while he destroyed families like he destroyed mine. If there is a chance to stop him, a chance to save even one other child from what happened to me. He met Tom's eyes. I will take it. Tom felt something shift in his assessment of the young man. Whatever Crane had done to him, it had not destroyed the core of who he was, the capacity for courage, the willingness to sacrifice. Joseph Blackfeather would have been proud. Then we do this together, Tom said. At dusk, Daniel approaches the camp with a white flag. Swiftbird goes with him for credibility. They talk to whoever will listen. And when Crane makes his move, you will be ready. We will be ready. The sun crawled across the sky. Tom spent the hours preparing, positioning the defenders, checking weapons, going over the plan again and again until everyone knew their part. As sunset approached, he found himself sitting with Elena on a flat rock overlooking the canyon. The sky was turning orange and purple, and the first stars were beginning to emerge. Do you think it will work? She asked. I think it is our best chance. That is not the same thing. No, it is not. They sat in silence for a while. Tom thought about all the sunsets he had watched in his life. The ones during the war when death seemed certain. The ones with Sarah when love made even ordinary moments feel sacred. The ones alone after she died when he wondered why he bothered to keep breathing. This one felt different. This one felt like possibility. I want you to know something, he said. Whatever happens tonight, these past few days have meant more to me than the last 5 years combined. You and your sisters, you reminded me what it means to fight for something that matters. Elena did not respond right away. When she did, her voice was thick with emotion she was trying to hide. My father would say the same thing if he were here. You honored his memory, Tom. You honored everything he believed in. I tried. You succeeded. Darkness fell. Daniel and Swiftbird walked out of the canyon with a white flag made from torn cloth. They moved slowly across the open ground toward Crane's camp. Tom watched through the fading light, his finger resting on his rifle trigger, ready to provide covering fire if things went wrong. The two young men reached the camp. Tom could see figures gathering around them, could see gestures and pointing, could not hear words but could imagine them. Listen to us. We have something to tell you. Something about the man you follow. The truth about Silas Crane. Minutes passed. Tom's heart pounded steadily in his chest, every beat a small victory against the darkness that kept trying to claim him. Then he saw it, a commotion in the camp. Raised voices, someone shoving someone else. The beginning of conflict. Daniel's words were working. And then Crane emerged from his tent with a shotgun in his hands and murder in his eyes. Tom raised his rifle. The final battle was about to begin. Silas Crane moved like a rattlesnake coiled to strike. Tom watched through his rifle sights as the man crossed the camp with that shotgun held ready. His face twisted into something barely human. 10 years of building an empire on broken children and stolen land. 10 years of believing himself untouchable. And now 2 of his own soldiers were standing in the firelight, telling the others exactly what kind of monster they served. Tom could see the moment Crane decided to kill Daniel. It was in the set of his shoulders, the way his grip shifted on the shotgun. The cold calculation replacing rage as he realized that dead men tell no tales and frightened men follow the one holding the biggest gun. Tom fired. The bullet caught Crane in the right arm and spun him sideways. The shotgun discharged into the dirt, sending up a spray of dust and rock. Crane screamed more from fury than pain and dove behind a supply wagon. Everything happened at once. 3 of Crane's men scattered for cover, their loyalty apparently not strong enough to survive the revelations Daniel had shared. 2 others raised their rifles toward the canyon entrance where Tom's muzzle flash had betrayed his position. Swiftbird tackled Daniel to the ground as bullets whined overhead. "Now," Tom shouted. "Everyone move now." The Blackfeather sisters erupted from their hiding positions. Elena led the charge with a rifle she had taken from one of the dead raiders. Diving Hawk followed with her makeshift bow. Even Kaya and Tala joined the assault, their wounds forgotten in the desperate need to end this fight while chaos still favored them. Tom pushed himself upright and advanced on the camp. His shoulders screamed with every step. His heart pounded erratically against his ribs, but he had bullets left and enemies to face and people counting on him to see this through. One of Crane's men rose from behind a rock with his pistol aimed at Elena. Tom shot him without breaking stride. Another tried to mount a horse and flee. Diving Hawk's arrow caught him between the shoulder blades and he tumbled into the dust. The camp had become a maelstrom of gunfire and shouting and desperate violence. Tom lost track of individuals in the chaos. He fired at movement, ducked behind cover when bullets came his way, kept pushing forward toward the wagon where Crane had taken shelter. He found Daniel and Swiftbird crouched behind an overturned water barrel. Both young men were bleeding from minor wounds, but their eyes were clear and focused. "Where is Crane?" Daniel pointed toward the far edge of camp where horses stamped nervously at their picket line. "He ran for the horses. I think he is trying to escape." Tom looked and saw it, a figure limping through the shadows, one arm hanging useless, the other dragging a rifle. Crane was indeed running. The master manipulator had finally met a situation he could not control, and his response was to abandon everything he had built rather than face the consequences. Tom would not let that happen. He ran. His body protested every step. His shoulder wound had reopened, and blood soaked through his bandages. His heart stuttered and jumped like a wild thing trying to escape his chest. But he ran because Joseph Blackfeather deserved justice, because Elena and her sisters deserved closure, because some debts could only be paid in full. He caught Crane at the picket line. The man was struggling to mount a horse one-handed when Tom's voice stopped him cold. "Crane." Silas Crane turned slowly. In the dim light, his face looked ancient. All the cruelty and cunning stripped away to reveal something pathetic underneath. A small man who had built himself up by tearing others down. A coward who preyed on children because adults might fight back. "Brennan." Well, Crane tried to smile, but it came out as a grimace. "You look terrible, old man. How is that heart holding up?" "Better than yours will be." Crane glanced at the rifle in Tom's hands, then at his own weapon lying in the dirt where he had dropped it trying to mount the horse. Calculation flickered in his eyes. Always calculating, always looking for an angle. "We can make a deal," Crane said. "I have money hidden, enough to buy that ranch of yours 10 times over. Let me go and I will tell you where it is. You can retire in comfort. Give those Indian girls whatever they need to start over." "I do not want your money." Then what do you want? Revenge? Justice? Crane laughed bitterly. There is no justice in this territory, Brennan. Only survival. Only power. I thought you were a soldier. I thought you understood that. I was a soldier. I followed orders I should have questioned. I did things that still haunt me, but I learned something your kind never will. Tom raised his rifle and sighted on Crane's chest. I learned that a man is defined not by what he does when someone is watching, but by what he does when no one is watching. Crane's hand moved toward his belt where a small pistol was tucked. Tom saw the motion and adjusted his aim. Don't. But Crane was past listening, past calculating. He had spent his whole life taking what he wanted by force, and he would die the same way. His hand closed on the pistol grip and started to draw. Tom fired. The bullet caught Crane's center mass and knocked him backward against the horse. He slid down the animal's flank and collapsed in the dust. The pistol fell from his fingers unfired. Tom walked forward and stood over the man who had killed Joseph Blackfeather, who had stolen children from their families and twisted them into weapons, who had built an empire on suffering and called it business. Crane looked up at him with eyes already glazing. Blood bubbled at his lips when he tried to speak. You think you have won? The words came out wet and broken. There are others, like me. You cannot stop them all. Maybe not, but I stopped you. Crane's mouth worked silently. He seemed to be trying to say something else, something defiant or threatening or simply mean, but the words never came. His eyes went empty and he was gone. Tom stood there for a long moment. The sounds of fighting had faded behind him. The night was quiet except for the nervous shuffling of horses and the distant call of an owl. It was over. He turned and walked back toward the camp. His legs felt like they belonged to someone else. His heart was doing something strange and slow in his chest. But he kept walking because there were people waiting for him. People who needed to know they were finally safe. Elena met him at the edge of the firelight. Her face was streaked with dirt and blood, but her eyes shone with something he had not seen there before. Peace, maybe, or the beginning of it. Crane? Dead, she nodded slowly. Then she did something that surprised them both. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him in a fierce embrace. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. Tom held her awkwardly. He was not used to being held. Sarah had been the last person to embrace him like this, and that was 5 years and a lifetime ago. But something in him cracked open at Elena's touch. Something frozen and protected and desperately alone. Your father saved my life, he said. I was just returning to the favor. You did more than that. You saved his legacy. You saved us. They stood there in the flickering firelight while the others gathered around. 9 Blackfeather women and their Aunt Naomi, who had survived weeks of captivity with her spirit unbroken. Diving Hawk and her recovered son Daniel. Swiftbird, who had remembered his true name after 10 years of darkness. All of them alive. All of them free. Tom looked at their faces and felt something he had not felt in years. Purpose. Meaning. The sense that his life had been worth something after all. His heart gave a strange flutter and the world tilted sideways. Tom? Elena's voice seemed to come from very far away. Tom, what is wrong? He tried to answer, but his legs gave out. The ground rushed up to meet him, and everything went dark. When Tom woke, he was lying on a blanket near a fire. Stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. Someone had bandaged his wounds and cleaned the blood from his face. He felt weak as water, but his heart was beating steadily. For now. Elena's face appeared above him. You collapsed. Your heart. I know. You need a doctor. Real medicine. We have to get you to Fort Defiance. Tom tried to sit up and managed it on the 3rd attempt. His body felt like it had been beaten with hammers, but he was alive. He had not expected to be. How long was I out? A few hours. The fighting is over. Crane's men who survived have scattered. Daniel convinced 3 of them to surrender peacefully. They are tied up waiting for the authorities. Tom looked around the camp. Supplies had been gathered. Horses had been calmed and collected. The Blackfeather sisters were resting together near another fire, their faces peaceful in sleep for perhaps the first time in weeks. You organized all this? Someone had to. You were busy dying. Tom almost smiled at that. I seem to be making a habit of it. Then stop. Elena's voice cracked slightly. Stop trying to die. We need you, Tom. Not just for protection. We need you because you are the only one who understands what we have been through. The only one who knew my father. The only one who can help us figure out what comes next. Tom looked at this young woman who had lost her father and her home and nearly her life, who had been beaten and sold and hung upside down in a slave market, who had fought back against impossible odds and emerged stronger than she had any right to be. Joseph would be so proud of her. There is a judge at Fort Defiance, Tom said slowly. His name is Morrison, an honest man. He will want to hear what happened here, the forged land documents, the murders, all of it. And after that? After that, we figure out how to get your land back, how to rebuild what Crane destroyed. Tom paused. If you want my help. I want your help. We all do. They rode out at dawn. The journey to Fort Defiance took 3 days of hard travel through territory that seemed determined to kill them. But they had horses now and supplies and the knowledge that the worst was behind them. Tom rode near the back of the group, conserving his strength, trying not to think about how much each mile cost him. His heart was failing. He knew it with the certainty of a man who had spent 52 years learning to read his own body. The digitalis helped, but it was not a cure, just a delay, a temporary reprieve from the inevitable. He had maybe a year left, maybe less. The doctors would tell him to rest, to avoid stress, to spend his remaining time in quiet comfort. Tom had never been good at quiet comfort. Fort Defiance appeared on the horizon late on the third day. A military outpost turned territorial headquarters, its walls and buildings promising something Tom had almost forgotten existed. Civilization, law, the possibility of justice through means other than violence. Judge Morrison received them in his chambers the following morning. He was a man of perhaps 65 with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Tom had known him briefly during the wars, had respected him as one of the few officers who treated both sides as human beings. Morrison listened to their story without interruption, examined the forged documents they had recovered from Crane's camp, took sworn testimony from Elena and her sisters and Daniel and Swiftbird. When they finished, he sat in silence for a long time. This is a serious matter, he finally said. Land fraud, murder, kidnapping, conspiracy. If what you have told me is true, then Silas Crane was running a criminal enterprise that violated half the laws on the books. It is true, Tom said. Every word. I believe you. Morrison stood and walked to his window. The problem is proof. Crane is dead. His organization is scattered. His victims are, he paused delicately, not the most credible witnesses in the eyes of certain courts. Elena stiffened. Because we are Apache. Because there are men in this territory who profit from the current state of affairs. Men who would prefer that land claims remain murky and justice remain selective. Morrison turned to face them. I am not one of those men, but I am also not naive enough to think that truth alone will carry the day. Then what do we do? Morrison returned to his desk and pulled out a map of the territory. The Blackfeather land claim is actually quite strong. Chief Joseph filed all the proper paperwork years ago, got it witnessed and notarized and registered with the territorial office. He pointed to a section of the map. This is yours, legally and properly yours. Crane's forgeries were clever, but they relied on people not looking too closely. And now I look closely. Morrison rolled up the map. I will open an official investigation into Crane's activities, subpoena records, interview witnesses, build a case that even the most biased court cannot ignore. He looked at Elena. It will take time, months probably, but if you are patient, the land will be restored to you. We have been patient for generations, Judge. We can be patient a little longer. Morrison nodded. Then his eyes moved to Tom. And what about you, Brennan? What are your plans? Tom had been thinking about that question since the night in Devil's Hollow. Since the moment he collapsed and realized that his time was running out faster than he had wanted to admit. I have a ranch, he said slowly, about 100 miles east of here. Good land, water rights, buildings that need repair but could be made useful again. You are going back to it? No. Tom took a breath. I am giving it away. Elena's head snapped toward him. What? My wife Sarah built that ranch with me. We raised our son there. It holds every good memory I have from the last 30 years. Tom felt his throat tighten. But Sarah is dead. My son wants nothing to do with me, and I am dying. The words hung in the air. No one contradicted them. I want to deed the ranch to the Chiricahua people, Tom continued, specifically as a school. A place where your children can learn to navigate this new world while keeping your traditions alive. Morrison leaned forward. That is a generous offer, but a school needs teachers, administrators, someone to run it. I know. Tom turned to Elena. I was hoping you might help me find those people. Elena stared at him with an expression he could not quite read. Then she laughed. Actually laughed. The sound was startling after everything they had been through. You want to start a school? You, a man who spent his whole life fighting. Maybe that is exactly why it should be me, or people like me, people who know what violence costs and want something better for the next generation. The room was quiet. Tom could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on all of them. This was not just about land or buildings. This was about legacy, about what they would leave behind when they were gone. Elena spoke first. My father dreamed of something like this. A place where our people could learn the white man's ways without losing our own. He said it was the only way we would survive. Joseph was a wise man. He was. Elena met Tom's eyes. And he would want us to honor his memory by building something that lasts, not by fighting endless wars we cannot win. Morrison cleared his throat. If you are serious about this, I can help with the legal arrangements. Establish a trust. Protect the property from future challenges. Make sure it serves its intended purpose for generations to come. I am serious. Then we have work to do. The next 2 months passed in a blur of paperwork and planning, and the slow, painful process of turning a dream into reality. Tom's health deteriorated steadily. The doctors at Fort Defiance confirmed what he already knew. His heart was giving out. The damage from years of hard living and old wounds had finally caught up with him. They gave him a year at most, probably less. He spent that time working harder than he had worked in decades. The ranch needed repairs before it could serve as a school. Tom oversaw the work despite his failing body, directing crews of Chiricahua workers who had come from Elena's settlement to help. They rebuilt the main house into classrooms, converted the barn into living quarters, dug a new well and repaired the fences and planted gardens that would feed students and teachers alike. Elena proved to be a natural administrator. She handled the countless details that Tom's failing mind could no longer track. Supplies and schedules and curriculum, recruiting teachers from among her people who had learned English at mission schools, negotiating with territorial officials who were suspicious of the whole enterprise. Her sisters each found their own roles. Kaya recovered from her infection and became the school nurse, her own suffering having taught her compassion for others in pain. Tala discovered a gift for teaching young children, her quiet patience perfect for students just beginning their education. The younger sisters helped where they could, growing into their responsibilities as the weeks passed. Aunt Naomi became the keeper of the traditions, teaching students the old songs and ceremonies that had been passed down through generations of Chiricahua people. Diving Hawk came to help as well, bringing Daniel with her. The young man was still healing from 10 years of Crane's influence, but day by day, Tom could see him becoming more like the person he was meant to be, less guarded, less afraid, willing to laugh occasionally and even to hope. And then there was James. Tom had sent a letter to his son shortly after arriving at Fort Defiance. A long letter that said everything he should have said years ago. The apologies he owed, the explanations he could not give, the simple truth that he loved his son and wanted nothing more than to see him again before the end. He did not expect a response. But on a cool October morning with the first hints of winter in the air, a rider appeared on the road leading to the ranch. Tom was sitting on the porch, too weak now to do much else, watching the students arrive for their daily lessons. The rider drew closer and Tom's heart gave a painful lurch. It was James. His son had grown into a man of 28 with his mother's eyes and his father's stubborn jaw. He dismounted slowly and stood at the edge of the porch, looking at Tom with an expression that held 10 years of anger and grief and something else, something that might have been hope. "You look terrible," James said. "I know. The letter you sent." Elena added a note of her own. "She told me what you did, what you risked." "She had no right to do that." "She had every right. Someone needed to tell me that my father was not the man I thought he was." Tom felt tears threatening, but he forced them back. There would be time for tears later, or there would not. "I was that man, James. For a long time, I was exactly the man you thought. Distant, absent, more interested in fighting than fathering. And now I am trying to be different, trying to build something instead of destroy it, trying to leave behind something worth remembering." James climbed the porch steps and sat down in the chair beside Tom. For a long moment, neither spoke. They just sat there watching the students file into the schoolhouse, their young voices carrying on the morning air. "I am a teacher," James finally said. "In Boston, literature and composition. I know. I have been proud of you, even when I could not say it. Elena thinks this school needs more teachers, especially ones who know the white man's education system from the inside." Tom's heart gave another lurch. "She asked you to come?" "She gave me information. The choice was mine." James turned to look at his father directly. I have been angry at you for 10 years. Angry that you were not there when mother died. Angry that you seemed to care more about strangers than your own family. You had every right to be angry. Maybe, but I am tired of being angry. And when I read what Elena wrote about you, about what you did for those girls, about the school you were building." James's voice cracked slightly. "I thought maybe I had been wrong. Maybe the man I was angry at did not exist anymore. Maybe he never really existed at all." Tom reached out and placed his hand over his son's. It was the first time they had touched in 10 years. The first time since Sarah's funeral, when James had refused his father's embrace and walked away without looking back. "I cannot undo the past, James. I cannot give you back the father you deserved. All I can do is try to be better. Try to make whatever time I have left mean something." "How long do you have?" "Months, maybe less." James was quiet for a moment. Then he squeezed his father's hand. "Then let us make those months count. Together." The school opened officially in January of 1885. They called it the Blackfeather Academy in honor of Joseph. The first class had 23 students ranging in age from 6 to 16. They learned reading and writing and mathematics. They learned the history of their own people and the history of the nation that had conquered them. They learned that education was a weapon more powerful than any gun. Tom watched it all from his porch. His body was failing faster now. He could not walk without help, could not speak without running out of breath. But every morning he sat on that porch and watched the students arrive. Watched James stand at the blackboard teaching lessons that would shape young minds for generations to come. Watched Elena manage it all with a grace and strength that Joseph would have recognized. On a cold February evening, with snow falling softly on the mountains, Elena came to sit with him. "The territorial representative visited today," she said. "He was impressed. Talked about using our model for other schools across Arizona." "Good. Judge Morrison's investigation is nearly complete. The land will be officially restored to us by spring. All of it." "Good." Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her pocket and withdrew something small, wrapped in cloth. She pressed it into Tom's palm. It was his watch, Sarah's watch, the one he had traded for 6 lives in a dusty slave market a lifetime ago. "How?" "Judge Morrison tracked it down. The trader sold it to a merchant in Tucson. The merchant sold it to a collector in San Francisco. It took months, but Morrison found it and bought it back." Elena closed Tom's fingers around the watch. "It belongs with you." Tom looked down at the gold case, felt the weight of it in his palm. Remembered Sarah's face when she gave it to him on their wedding day. Remembered all the years it had traveled with him through war and peace and the long, slow decline that brought him here. "To Thomas, my compass in the storm. All my love. Sarah, 1862. "Thank you," he whispered. Elena leaned over and kissed his forehead. "Thank you, Tom." for everything. That night, Tom sat alone on the porch watching the stars emerge one by one from the darkening sky. The same stars Joseph had watched with him in that cave 24 years ago. The same stars that had guided him through battlefields and deserts and the long journey home. He thought about debts and how they were really gifts in disguise. Joseph had given him a second life, and he had spent that life running from it, fighting instead of building, destroying instead of creating, until a tattoo on a girl's shoulder reminded him of who he was supposed to be. He thought about Sarah and how she had loved him despite knowing exactly who he was. How she had believed in the man he could become even when he did not believe in himself. How her final words had been a command to live, to find those who needed him. He thought about James and the miracle of reconciliation, the son who had come back to him not because the past was forgiven, but because the future was still unwritten. They would have months together, maybe a year, time enough to say everything that needed saying. And he thought about Elena and her sisters and the school that bore their father's name, the legacy that would outlast them all. Children learning to navigate between two worlds, building bridges instead of walls, becoming the generation that would finally break the cycle of violence and loss. Tom Brennan had spent 52 years running from one fight to the next, looking for purpose in conflict because he did not know how to find it in peace. Now he understood. Purpose was not found, it was built. One choice at a time, one act of kindness at a time. One moment of courage when courage seemed impossible. Joseph Blackfeather had given him a second life with a cup of water in the desert. Tom had spent that life saving 9 of Joseph's descendants and building a school that would educate generations more. The debt was paid, not because the numbers balanced, debts of honor never balanced, but because the gift had been passed on. The mercy shown to a dying soldier had become mercy shown to dying children. The love that had saved one life had become love that would save hundreds. That was what Joseph meant when he said the Chiricahua measure worth by choices made when no one is watching. Not by what you take, but by what you give. Not by what you destroy, but by what you build. Not by how you die, but by how you live. Tom closed his eyes and listened to the wind moving through the mountains. Somewhere in the school building, James was reading to a group of students by lamplight. Somewhere, Elena was reviewing plans for the spring planting. Somewhere, Diving Hawk was singing a lullaby to Daniel's children, the grandchildren she thought she would never have. Life continuing, life growing, life winning against all the forces that tried to stamp it out. Tom smiled. For the first time in years, he was not afraid of what came next, not afraid of the darkness waiting at the end of the road, because he knew now that death was not the end. Legacy was the end. The ripples you left behind in the lives you touched. Joseph Blackfeather had understood that. Now Tom understood it too. He opened his eyes one more time and looked up at the stars, found the moon rising over the mountains, watched its light spread across the land he had helped save. "Thank you, Joseph," he whispered, "for everything." The moon rose higher, the wind grew still, and Thomas Brennan, soldier and wanderer and builder of schools, let go of the breath he had been holding for 52 years. When they found him the next morning, he was still sitting in his chair with Sarah's watch in his hand and a peaceful expression on his weathered face. The first thing Elena noticed was that he was smiling. The second thing she noticed was the piece of leather lying on his chest, the moonwing symbol that Joseph had given him 25 years ago. Tom had written something on the back in a shaking hand. "For James, pass it on." They buried him on a hill overlooking the school. James spoke at the service about a father he was only beginning to know and the legacy he intended to continue. Elena spoke about debts that were really gifts and strangers who became family. But it was Rosa who said what everyone was feeling. "Grandfather Tom saved us," the 13-year-old said, using the title she had given him months ago. "Not just our lives, our futures. And now it is our turn to save others the way he saved us." The students returned to their lessons. The teachers returned to their teaching. Life at the Blackfeather Academy continued as it would continue for generations to come. And every year on the anniversary of his death, they gathered on that hill to remember Thomas Brennan, the soldier who learned to build, the wanderer who found his home, the man who honored his debts by turning them into gifts. In the harsh lands of the Arizona Territory where survival was earned with blood and sweat, Some stories ended in violence and loss, but this one ended with children laughing in a schoolhouse, with a mother holding her recovered son, with a father reunited with his child, with mercy given and mercy received, with a debt that was never really a debt at all. Just a reminder that even in the darkest nights, there are still people willing to share their water with a stranger. And sometimes that stranger becomes family.